Languages, well, we have, 23 currently recognized in the Constitution, in addition to English. We have 35 spoken by more than 1 million people each, if you ask the ethno-linguists. And I think we have about 22,000 dialects, some of which are spoken by more people than speak Norwegian or Danish. So where does language give us a national identity? And as for ethnicity, our ethnicities are also diverse. And strictly speaking, there are Indians who have ethnically more in common with so-called foreigners than they have with each other. So an Indian Punjabi or Bengali is ethnically more kin to a Pakistani or a Bangladeshi than he is to a Poonawalla or a Bangalorean. So ultimately, none of these classic features gives us our nationhood, and surely not religion either, since we are home to every religion known to man, with the possible exception of Shintoism, and every kind of way of reaching out one's hands to God is prevalent in India. So what it is instead is indeed the nationalism of this idea. The idea, if I can sort of turn Peter Pan around on his head, of an ever land. A land that is emerging from this ancient civilization, that is united in a common geography, what remains to us after 47, and that is above all sustained by pluralist democracy. Ours is what I've called in my book, The Battle of Belonging, a civic nationalism. That is a nationalism anchored not in timeless verities that come to you from birth of your identity, your religious identity, your caste, and so on. It's a nationalism anchored in a constitution and in institutions. That is where the idea of India is sustained. And that's a very, very interesting idea, because when you think about the institutions that sustain our democracy, you find that we are able, through our democracy, to overcome these differences of caste, of creed, of color, of culture, of consonant, of conviction, of custom and costume, and still rally around a consensus. And that consensus is around the simple democratic idea that in a large, diverse democracy like ours, you don't really need to agree all the time, so long as you agree on the ground rules of how you will disagree. It seems to me that the reason we were able to preserve our consensus through all these 7.5 decades was that simple idea of India. And with that, therefore, it's a democracy that is sustained by autonomous institutions. It's a democracy that holds up pluralism as its ideal, that sees in our diversity not a sign of weakness, but a sign of our strength and accommodativeness, a democracy based on inclusion. And when you look at the kind of changes that have taken place in the last 75 years through this democracy, one can only marvel. I mean, look at the social changes for 3,000 years. Could anyone in Aryavrat have imagined a Dalit woman ruling over the Indo-Gangetic plain? And yet we've seen Mayawati be 3 times elected as Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh. In economics, we came to power with the economics of nationalism, where we felt that since the East India Company had come to trade but stayed on to rule, we had to be suspicious of every foreigner with a briefcase. And we cut India off from the global capitalist system, the global economy, and tried to grow through protectionism, giving us what the minister reminded us was called the Hindu rate of growth. But then we changed, and that transformation, starting in 1991, with Manmohan Singh's famous line that no power on earth can stop an idea whose time has come. Well, the time came for that change, and that change brought us to the kind of revolutionary economic changes we've witnessed for the last generation, the last 30 years. And then, apart from that social and economic change, we have had the political change of a country founded on secularism, inclusion, and diversity, finding itself suddenly ruled by a party that professes Hindutva and has the avowed aim of converting India into a Hindu Rashtra. So given all of that, in any other country, these kind of dramatic transformations might have resulted in a revolution. But the reason we've done these transformations without revolution and have been evolving towards interesting manifestations of all of these, all contested, all debated, but all happening through the ballot box, is because of the democratic consensus I described to you. And that's why it is so absolutely vital for us. When we speak about the question that Mrs. Irani answered through economic points, which I don't think any of us would disagree with any of the economic points she raised, it still avoids the central question of the toxin of hatred for minorities in general and one minority in particular that has been injected into our national discourse. The government may not have officially done it, but it's condoned all those who, in the name of the ruling forces of our country, have othered a significant portion of our population. And that exclusion is actually, in many ways, profoundly anti-Hindu. The minister quoted Swami Vivekananda. Well, I've been a Vivekananda bhakt since my college days. And having read everything he said, all his addresses and speeches, I can tell you that his idea of Hinduism was very different from that of the advocates of Hindutva. Because he said that he was proud to speak of a religion that gave the world not just tolerance but acceptance. Something I read as a child that stayed with me ever since. Because when you think about it, we're all taught in school that tolerance is a virtue, a tolerant king's a good guy. But when you really think about it, tolerance is a very patronizing idea. The tolerant king is really saying, look, I have the truth, you are in error, but I will magnanimously indulge you in your right to be wrong. That's not good enough. But what Swami Vivekananda said is Hinduism is not just that. Hinduism teaches acceptance. And acceptance means, I believe I have the truth, you believe you have the truth, I will respect your truth, please respect my truth. And to my mind, that was the single most profound way of actually incorporating and embracing the kind of acceptance of difference that makes it possible for Indians and for Hindus in general, at least in the past, to live peacefully and with mutual respect with people of other faiths and religions. Sadly, that is what is being challenged today. I have no quarrel with the development and economic arguments the minister made. Those are all very well. I think that we want to see our country growing in terms of both the hardware of development and the software of it. The hardware being, of course, the infrastructure, the roads, the ports, the highways, all of which we all welcome. Everyone uses them irrespective of their identity. But also the software of development, which is the human capital that is so precious in transforming any country. And that software of development includes, of course, the right for every human being in our country to be able to have 2 or 3 square meals a day, to have a roof over their head against the sun and the rain, to be able to get a decent job that enables them to support their families with self-respect, to have a healthcare clinic within at least a 5-kilometer walk of their places of residence, and to be able to educate their children and dream of a better life for their children than they themselves have. Let's face it, whatever our government says, there are still a couple of 100 million Indians at the very least, maybe more, who cannot take any of those things for granted. And that's why that challenge still remains of fulfilling that idea of India. An Indian idea in which I hope we will be able to deliver all of those things, an India in which we will not tear each other apart over unfortunate regurgitations of badly understood history, to beat today's people over the heads with the sins of their supposed forebears 5 or 6 centuries ago. An India in which we will, in fact, not have a government telling us what to eat, who to sleep with, who to love, what to think, what to say, but a system in which all Indians, going back to that precious constitution our founders gave us, that all Indians will be able to think, live, breathe, worship, eat, thrive freely, unafraid of the prowess of the products of the outside world, unafraid of the religious biases of their neighbors, but willing to take the world as it comes, to accept the differences they see around them, to embrace them as part of the glorious tapestry that makes up the idea of India. That is an India that will truly shine, and it will shine for all. Thank you very much, and Jai Hind.